You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 21st of August, 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Golf clubs, instinct over process, and circumventing the ICC. What does it take to make peace today? There are more wildfires in Europe, but how do the world's cities adapt? And shh, this is a book club. Just don't talk about what you're reading. I'm Emma Nelson, and the Monocle Daily starts now. Hello there, and a very warm welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our very busy Studio 4 in Du Forststrasse 90 here in Zurich. I'm Emma Nelson, and my guests, Jessica Bridger and Eemeli Isoaho, will discuss the day's big stories, including how do you build a new nightclub in a city which wants to sleep? That's a dilemma facing planners in Amsterdam. Stay tuned, all that and more is coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Studio 4 here at Du Forststrasse 90 in Zurich. Around the very tall desk today is Jessica Bridger, the journalist consultant on urbanism and contributing editor Monocle, and by Eemeli Isoaho, a programme coordinator for peace mediation at ETH Zurich. A very good evening to you both. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's so good to have you around. And Eemeli, we're going to come to the thorny issue of peace negotiations in a moment. I think our subjects have been picked quite deliberately to play to both your skills. But the one thing that people are still talking about, and anybody who listened to the Monocle Daily yesterday would have heard our guests diving deep into a sort of a spiritual assessment of choices of supermarkets here in Switzerland. It is Migros' 100th anniversary. And this, in any other country, one would imagine, would be a thing, and people would talk briefly about it and the change in retail, etc., etc. But here in Switzerland, you are absolutely going bananas. So we're going to go back to it. And I'm terribly sorry if you didn't like our subject about supermarkets yesterday, because the next couple of minutes are going to be devoted once again to it. You started bouncing up and down, Jessica, when we mentioned Migros. And you said, I have very strong feelings about this. And I'm like, what strong feelings can one have about loyalties to a supermarket in 2025?
I think it's that the supermarket choice reflects a lot about who you are and what your identity is. So you begin to associate a certain supermarket brand, in my case, Co-op, the competitor to Migros.
Fighting talk.
With who you are as, for me, as a Swiss immigrant, as an immigrant into Switzerland. And Co-op has a certain values that it reflects. It has a certain product mix. And when I go into Migros, I just don't feel at home.
We're not feeling Migros. Goodness me, Eemeli, as a Finn in Switzerland, have you had that sort of same fire ignited within you, or can you still retain a certain degree of neutrality as a Finn and indeed a peace negotiator? Does this tap into anything deeper than what's nearby?
I'm always surprised by the kind of emotion that comes into a conversation when I talk about this topic with my Swiss friends. I've switched teams, to be honest. I started as a team Migros when I moved to Zurich. And then when I moved to another flat that was closer to Coop, very conveniently, I just switched on to Coop. So I'm relatively impartial. But what I think is
I would expect so, given your job, actually.
Absolutely. But what is interesting to observe is that the kind of level of granularity that people go into. So some people are team Coop when it comes to cheese, but when it comes to bread, they're team Migros. So again, depending on the types of products you're purchasing, you might be team A or team B, but also some associate political ideologies and leanings with one or the other. So it gets really complicated.
You know where this is going with you, don't you? I mean, what can we learn from supermarket wars to solve real wars?
That it's
your face has just given me such a look. I'm so sorry.
That maybe that you don't need to pick teams often. That it's good to buy cheese at Coop and go for your bread in Migros.
I can see that in the forthcoming summit in either Budapest or wherever. Which one do you go to? Because let's move on to actually the more serious subject about making peace. And what does it take to make peace when the usual rules no longer apply? I mean, we can try with cheese, but in the last few days, we have seen some serious derailments of the norms that usually are associated with peace negotiations. The Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb was dispatched as part of the team of European leaders this week, offering an explanation for his presence before the question could even be asked. He said, for a country like Finland, he said, it is important to be involved. We are a small country, but we share a border with Russia, and Ukraine's perspective is relevant. That, Eemeli, I'll begin with you on this one, is something that you would imagine would and should be said, but what everybody else was saying was what Donald Trump was talking about, which was like, he looks good, he plays golf, he's a big man.
No, and I think that's, you put your finger on it. I think it's, first of all, it's quite incredible that a Finnish president is taking part in these discussions. You don't have so many historical examples of that, perhaps with the exception of late President Ahtisaari, who was part of these discussions but brought into the presidency decades of UN experience. I think it is because President Stubb is a very, very well-networked politician. He's been a prime minister, he's been a foreign minister, minister of trade. He's very deft communicator. He speaks in very many languages, and he can kind of hone in on speaking points. But at the same time, he's a very good people person. He's played golf at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump, established a personal relationship with him, which seems to be working. And I think he's made a deliberate decision that it's better to be in the room than outside the room, and do the charm offensive and kind of weave in political points as well. So it's definitely part of his, I think, personal attributes more than the history of Finland.
Indeed, and the interesting thing is that he was at the table on Monday, isn't it, Jessica? The fact is that in order to get to the table, you have to offer yourself up for the table, and clearly it was decided, or it was considered, that he would be a very good person to have there.
And I think he has to then have the trust of the other EU representatives that are there, and has to be able to himself be confident that he can be the quote-unquote Trump whisperer. And I think, mentioning the golf thing, he had gone into it playing a round of golf with Trump before anyone actually did anything else with Trump. And what I've heard from some journalists that I know who had dealings with Trump in the early 2000s, way before becoming president was even on the table, was that Trump is not only a relationships guy, but he's incredibly charismatic in that one-on-one interaction. And you want to like him.
What, Trump or Stubb?
Trump.
Gosh, okay. That's... Eemeli, have you heard about this? I mean, there is that feeling, isn't there? And this is arguably the thing, that the approach that he's taking, which is he sort of knocks people sideways in public and whacks tariffs here, and humiliates Volodymyr Zelensky there. But one-on-one, there is always that potential for the deal.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's also a reason why people vote for him. He comes across as very charming to some people, very attractive as a leader. But of course, his approach, as you said it, he sees peace negotiations, political negotiations as business negotiations, which comes in or includes pressure, making quick fixes, quick deals. One could question the sustainability of those deals. But it is this give and take, which often means that he prioritizes personal relations over a more systematic institutional approach. And that's where I think actually leaders like President Stubb or even Keir Starmer, with Jonathan Powers as his national security advisor, can play a constructive role, try to bring into these conversations a bit more of a methods-based, institutional, systematic approach, and in the best of cases, perhaps have Trump adopt them as his own ideas and push for them. And I think that's the role they can play behind the closed doors in this small group of European leaders.
And that idea that I think Donald Trump said in an interview after the White House meeting, where he said that his approach to negotiation was more instinct rather than process. I mean, it's an interesting one, given the fact that one wonders how much we have relied on process for so long, and the fact that, dare I say it, we've had no breakthrough in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine for more than 3 years now. Process has been followed. Is instinct that little spark that needs to be trusted at all?
I don't know, but it's certainly the way that Trump does a lot, right? Even looking at some of the things that he's done in the U.S. State Department, for example, a lot of people who had certain national expertise are now gone from that institution, as it were, and it are being replaced with this new approach, which is based more on real-time information and instinct. I don't know where that gets us, but it's something new that's now being tried.
Eemeli, where does this get us? Because you're now teaching peace negotiations, and this is, tell us about whether what is happening in front of our eyes is a new thing, is a valid thing, and is actually could be a successful thing.
Yeah, so actually, I don't think it's fully new. I think we have a bit this romantic idea that in the past decade or so, peace negotiations have been all kind of rainbows and unicorns, very interest-based negotiations. There have been tough kind of hard bargaining taking place, perhaps in a different way and a different fashion than what we see with Trump now. But I do think you do need these deals at the leadership level. I think they're absolutely necessary. I do not think they're sufficient. You need broader political buy-in at the domestic level, at the regional level. Leaders will need to sell any deals that they get to their constituencies, and that's often, if not harder, at least equally hard of a thing to do than getting to the deal itself. But I would also not be too optimistic with what's happening at the moment. If you backtrack a few weeks ago, we were talking about Trump's ultimatum for Putin. Let's get to a ceasefire, or else, and that else was going to be tougher sanctions, including on Russia's trading partners. But now, if you look at things in Moscow, you don't have the kind of danger of increased sanctions. You don't even have this call, a unified call in the West for an immediate ceasefire. So if I were in Moscow and Putin, I would be relatively happy with how things have unfolded over the past few days. And that translates into them not having to make any immediate concessions at the moment.
Which sort of suggests that instinct trumps overcomes strategy at the moment, and that the long-term cool heads and the objectivity of any kind of agreement seems to be sort of pushed down the scale a bit.
Maybe. I mean, one could hope that kind of with these disruptions, like let's host a summit in Alaska and then let's meet, that disrupts the status quo a little bit. I would agree that not a lot of progress had been made over the past months. So perhaps the positive silver lining framing of this could be that through these disruptions, we will get to something a bit more professional and systematic. And you do see, for instance, on the security guarantees, it's not Trump himself talking about it. You have teams flying into Washington from Europe, having very serious professional conversations around that topic. So again, if one wanted to be optimistic through this disruption, something a bit more systematic and thought through could come about.
Let's move on to our second subject of tonight's programme. French and German firefighters are now joining in with efforts to extinguish one of Spain's most destructive wildfires in decades. An area more than twice the size of London has now fallen to the fires. Satellites are now being used to track them. Such is the fire's scale. Well, Europe seems to be stepping up in the short term, but where, however, are the longer strategies? Jessica, this is your area of expertise. This summers for wildfires in southern Europe have once again been remarkable.
Yeah, so throughout Europe this year, we've had already, since January, 440,000 hectares have burned. And that is a record, and that's more than double the average. And what we're seeing, that's an area about as big as Luxembourg. And what we're seeing is that we've had a hot and dry summer, which followed a wet summer where a lot of vegetation grew. And that, followed by hot and dry conditions, makes a perfect storm situation to have these widespread wildfires. And I think it's interesting to look at how hard each place is hit and how there's collaboration across borders. Emil and I were talking about that earlier, and how there can be collaboration because fires don't have borders. The smoke and the fallout and the pollution from fires carry way across continents. For example, I was in Maine over the summer, and we had significant PM 2.5 air pollution from fires that were thousands of miles away in Canada. And I think it's this growing awareness that we are part of a global system, that fires follow a global system. They follow patterns. The places where fires happen, when they happen, a dry season, preceding a wet season, and things like that are part of the reason why they happen where they do at the scale that they do.
And how effective are these areas of cooperation? I mean, mentioned just a moment ago that the French and the Germans are sending firefighters to help. That's literally all hands to the pump. But one wonders where the wider cooperation is.
And that's perhaps the irony if you look at international discussions at the moment. Countries tend to be looking more inward than outward at the moment, when exactly what we would need is cross-boundary collaboration, regional integration on these issues. And climate change and environment don't seem to be the most popular buzzwords at the moment when you look at international political discussions. And perhaps framing some of these things through national security might be prudent, just to gain that traction you need politically to make sure that countries do collaborate with their neighbours. But again, it's easier said than done.
Indeed. And Jessica, help us with this. Why is it that the wildfires are always, from a journalist's point of view, mid to late bulletin? That's the way that I would figure it. And sort of in terms of the way that one orders the priority of stories that are being told. I mean, one could arguably say that the events connected with the Ukraine war and the events in Gaza are going to push up to the top of any running order, which means that although the wildfires still have a place, it's never going to be at the top. But there does seem to be that sort of absence of framing, doesn't there? That you have a wildfire and it is something that happens exclusively within its own right. But in actual fact, were it to be framed more broadly as another climate change episode, that would create a stronger narrative, surely, and create a stronger impetus or awareness.
That framing is there to some degree, and I think it's just the point that it's seen as a quote-unquote natural disaster, and it doesn't have human agents that you can immediately kind of blame or assign agency to it. And we saw wildfires such as the ones in LA earlier this year hit the top of the papers because you were seeing these scenes of devastation from an urban area. And it's interesting to look at where urban wildfires, which are increasing across the world, become kind of top of page, whereas wildfires that are doing massive amounts of devastation, releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which has knock-on effects, are getting so much less attention. And I think it just goes to kind of this issue that it's very hard for us to understand systemic crises and cascading crises and how these kind of complex global systems interplay with what in the end is human agency and human action that creates them. I don't know how you tell that story better or more effectively. Kim Stanley Robinson definitely gave it a try in his The Ministry for the Future novel, which was recommended by Barack Obama, many newspapers, and gives a good picture, an optimistic picture of how we can understand climate crises better and respond to them in a speculative environment.
And just referring to sort of the moments and the places where these problems are actually properly addressed, we need to go to Zambia, to an event last week that's just wrapped up with the, I think it's called the NAP Expo, isn't it? And that's something, Jessica, which is an attempt by the United Nations at least to help cities address their climate issues. How practical and how successful an event do we believe it was?
So it was a really interesting event. So the NAP is the National Adaptation Plan. That came out of the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030. And it's an effort for countries to respond at a national level to how to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And this particular Expo was for the least developed countries. It had an audience and participants from around the globe, but was trying to show off different ways of actually addressing that have been used in these national adaptation plans, climate change adaptation strategies. And it really got into a lot of really interesting approaches. For example, there was a session given by landscape architects on nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions are, as you would think, they're solutions and responses to climate change that put forward a way of dealing with things with natural systems. So they're cost-effective, they're scalable, and they enhance biodiversity and local livelihoods. And I think that there's a key there that the UN has recognized, and they've launched this thing called Works with Nature, showcasing a lot of these nature-based solutions. And you're seeing across the UN a lot of language about nature-based solutions and their potential for addressing so many systemic issues.
But when you have the likes of Donald Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement and sending everything backwards, and also the fact is that the private sector for some time now has been looking at ESG as an important thing because dare I say it, those they were beholden to, their shareholders, demanded that it was something that needed to be addressed. And then that has kind of slipped down the running order again of business priorities. And people are now saying, actually, we just need to press ahead with doing what we do. And BP is one of those places. Eemeli, how much does that actually sort of pose a bigger, longer term problem in terms of ensuring that everybody does their bit?
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard from colleagues and friends who do work in, for instance, in the private sector on sustainability related issues. For obvious reasons, they're trying to use different terms, again, linking it perhaps to regional or national self-sufficiency and preparedness and resilience, and linking it to national security to, in a way, continue to do some of the important sustainability work that they have done in the past, but talk about it in terms that might be accepted, even if you're working with colleagues across the Atlantic. So I think that's one. I would definitely first focus on what actually is being done and hopefully continue that. But surely, I think, again, as with, President Stubb in his interactions at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump, he himself said that, he was able to perhaps soften some of the language vis-a-vis Zelensky by Trump and harshen some of the language vis-a-vis Putin. So you do need that convincing effort at that level as well. And try to find those convincing arguments. Why is it in the interest of a leader like Trump, or any European leader for that matter, to take this issue seriously in the mid to long term?
Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on to a story which has to do with cities as well, but not just coping with climate change, but coping with each other. We head to Amsterdam. It has a mixed blessing, doesn't it, of being all places to all people. It's incredibly famous for its nightlife, in particular its relaxed attitude to certain substances, so it attracts those in need of immediate fun. In many other ways, though, it's extremely traditional. It has historic buildings, waterways. It also has a housing problem. There's not enough places to go around. And all of this is sort of comparatively crammed into a small space. So it means that trying to fix one problem will inevitably lead to someone else's problem being made worse. And this is the current case, isn't it, Jessica, with the approval of a new institute for night culture, which will be nightclub and retail and residential, built in the middle of Amsterdam, and no one's happy.
No, sadly, they are not, especially not the heritage faction. They view the construction of this building as possibly endangering not only the look of the entire neighborhood by introducing something new into it, but also because they intend to do some excavation in an area where you have a lot of subsidence, because Amsterdam is, after all, directly on the canals. Perhaps that excavation will damage or imperil the buildings around it. But I think the larger issue here is really, it's turned into a debate about what should go where in a city. What is appropriate in a certain area? Do you want to have a nightclub next to you? Do you want to have density? Do you want to have taller buildings? What are you willing to compromise, even if you recognize the problems that are in a city? And so the Institute for Night Culture has become this flashpoint of all these different issues that come together that people are really willing to go up in arms about.
And Eemeli, explain a little bit from your perspective, living in Zürich, from Finland, which has a very defined space it can occupy. It's got the sea and it's got forests, so it can only do so much, and it has a beautiful historic quarter. So this is a subject which actually challenges any city that's been around for more than 50 years, surely.
Absolutely. And I think also in the article, they talked a little bit about this planning efficiency versus democratic oversight. And there's often, we like to complain about the complaints being made, and, construction projects take forever. But I do think there's a reason some of those processes are there to make sure that we don't do away with historical buildings. Surely some of the processes could be made more efficient and faster. But I was actually just surprised that the nightlife is a thing. I think you read nowadays a lot of stories about clubs being closed and nightlife being less and less popular. So in a way, as a not so frequent nightlife attendant, but at least sometimes enjoying it, I was kind of pleased to know that there is still some vibrancy. And I saw a great quote somewhere that nightlife can be both the heartbeat and a headache of a city. And that seems to be true in Amsterdam.
Can I just say, I absolutely love the way you described your social life just then. It was the most genteel and relaxed. Like, I do like to go out in the evening. And one wonders what happens when and the buttons get switched off with Eemeli, when the big red button gets pushed. And it is that funny thing, isn't it, that a city is always growing and no answer is ever right. And this thing will probably be built and a nightclub will be there and people will get cross, but then people will get used to it. And it will work for a bit and then it'll be replaced by something else. And in 5, 10 years, 15, 20 years, unless it's an absolutely legendary hotspot that Amsterdam becomes globally renowned for, it will probably turn into something else.
That's true. But it's good that it is engendering all this debate, because we do need housing in many, many cities across the world. As the world urbanizes, the pressure on housing has been immense. And in many cities in Europe, people aren't willing to do what it's going to take to create that housing, which in many cases is densification in the form of taller buildings. So here in Switzerland, 61% of people perceive the housing shortage, but about 50% reject taller buildings. And how do we communicate about what we need to do to solve urban problems, to densify? It's not only heritage. Heritage, I think, is an interesting issue to pick out to make a, not in my backyard issue, because the heritage of this old quarter is so nice and we need to preserve it. But we need to really look at what are other arguments, such as disturbing view corridors or people's worries about, heavier loads in public transportation. How do we, as people who are involved with making cities better, building cities better, the expansion of cities, how do we create discourse in the urban environment where people come to accept solutions that are for the greater good, that often involve trade-offs that are actually better for them? More frequent public transport, more designed green areas. There are ways to talk about these things, just like we were talking about before climate. There's ways to talk about larger issues and make them tangible, make people feel like actors within their city, actors within the climate crisis, in these big systems.
Right, let's talk about discourse and green spaces and have neither of them. Well, let's have green spaces but no talking, because everybody needs to stop talking now. No, actually you two don't. Pick up a book though, because Helsinki has become the location for what is known as a silent book club. And it sort of does what it says on the tin. You take a book, you join a group of others and you read. The club is described as being part of a new thing called the Introverts Happy Hour. Eemeli, without generalising too much about the Finns.
Please feel free.
My experience of Finnish people is that they are phenomenally economical with their words. And so to have a silent book club not necessarily comes as much of a surprise to me. Now, please tell me I am wrong.
You're absolutely not wrong. I think this is like the utopian idea for Finns. You get the best of both worlds. It's still, and if you read people who attend these things, they appreciate the communal aspect of it, but yet you're there sitting quietly reading a book and that's it. So you can have the communal side. But then at the end of the meeting, 1 hour mark, when they ring the bell and the reading hour is over, apparently it's perfectly accepted for you to just walk out and go back to your flat. Some people apparently do stick around and talk, but I think for Finns, it's the best of both worlds. You get to do something together with other people, but you do it on your own. You don't necessarily have to speak with others. But I actually do see the kind of social pressure element. Kind of if you're struggling to read, you're kind of too taken up by the temptation of opening up your phone and doom scrolling. Having 20 other people reading around you has a bit the same effect as I go and grade exams in a cafe, because then I feel like I need to do it, otherwise people will judge me. So perhaps that has...
Hang on, say that again. You go and grade exams in a cafe, which frankly, in terms of sort of discretion, starts to ring enormous bells to me. But it's you can't grade exams where? At work or at home?
No, sometimes if it's a little bit more of a tedious task, you're tempted to...
Or your students are loving you for saying that right now.
Their papers are lovely to read, exams
Indeed.
A bit less so. But it's you have the temptation to start cleaning your office, reading emails, doing anything except, doing the actual grading. So then having, your...
I think you owe a massive apology to your students now.
I believe so.
Yeah, I think this is...
You'll help me draft that email.
I will absolutely help you with that one, but we might have to do it in a cafe so we're not distracted by, I don't know what's in the fridge in my flat. But it is that thing, isn't it? The idea that to be alone but to be in company is actually a lovely thing.
I have a friend in Berlin, the Irish-German architect Stephen Malloy, and he had a research project going for a while, which was about being together alone and alone together in urban environments. And it was just the idea that people like to have contact with other people. And these silent book clubs are an excellent way of leveraging that to, fight the urban loneliness epidemic that we hear so much about. And in fact, what I discovered is the Silent Book Club has 2,000 chapters in 60 plus countries, including 3 here in Switzerland.
Okay, that's a lovely idea. We can all go and be together alone, hopefully somewhere really, really nice. But when I read about it, the first thing that I immediately thought about was that hellish reading or quiet hour that you were given at school. It's like, now everybody be done your work. Now you sit down, now you read your book, and you sit there and you hated every minute of it because you were forced to sit down, and I'm a terrible fidget, and it was a really, really bad place to be. Is it one of those places that actually forces you to stop fidgeting and to force doom scrolling?
I think so. It sounds like people do it also because it's a way to leave the house. Kind of if you had to read that book that you're struggling to finish on your own couch, you might continue struggling. Whereas if you have a deliberate activity, you go to a park on a sunny day, hopefully, someone rings a bell and you have 1 hour to do some reading and the bell will ring again. It's kind of an activity. It's as if you're going to the gym or whatever activity you're doing. So I think it's just another way of approaching an activity and making it more fun. And in this day and age, I think any effort to get people to read more, I think I would welcome that. I mean, just recently I heard in Denmark they got rid of the tax on books just to try to incentivize people to read. I think let's have it and let's take it, and if that's a way to make Finns read more, I think that's wonderful.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to Eemeli Isoaho, a programme coordinator for peace mediation at ETH in Zurich, and Jessica Bridger, journalist consultant on urbanism and contributing editor Monocle, to us here at Monocle. Thank you both so much for joining me here at Dufourstrasse 90 from Studio 4. Things are quietening down here, so we're going to enjoy a weekly letter. Here's Monocle's Monica Lillis from County Kerry in Ireland.
I hate to brag, but I am luckily still young enough to go on holiday with my parents. They do like to drag their heels when I spring on them that I'd like to tag along, but I know deep down they're really excited to spend some quality time with their eldest daughter. Whilst they are both working abroad, in between their manic schedule, they still manage to take some excellent trips. A few years back, they headed to the Maldives for 2 weeks. They often take city breaks to exciting European capitals like Athens, and more often than not, you can find them relaxing on the coast of France's Nouvelle-Aquitaine. And whilst I'm not always invited to every trip, I like to remind them that I'll never be too old to come along. Here in London, it can be a little bit dreary in the winter. Dark skies and seemingly constant precipitation mean I'm often dreaming of a splendid summer holiday. This year in particular, I was conjuring up images of a fortnight on the Mediterranean, Monocle's quality of life issue in one hand, and an Aperol Spritz in the other. So imagine my face when Mum and Dad told me that this year we're going to the west of Ireland. Only slightly dramatic. Now, it goes without saying that Ireland is a fantastic country, with soft power like no other, but it didn't exactly live up to my own selfish expectations of what a holiday should be. The backstory to our visit is that, much like many other Brits, my father is a second-generation Irish immigrant. His own mammy and daddy left Cork in the late 60s in order to secure themselves a better economic future. So Ireland has always held a special place in mine and the Lillis' heart, but I must admit I didn't have much of a connection to the country growing up. After my granddad sadly passed away in 1995, my Gran Morna never really wanted to return. She'd left her former life behind and was happy enough in her new home on the east coast of England. Fast forward to 2 years ago, Morna died too, and when I was inexplicably moaning about my desire to sit on a warm sandy beach, I could see that for my dad, Ireland would be a chance to reconnect to his family roots. Now, I could sit here and go on about returning to the land of my people, but I don't want to come across like one of those Irish Americans, or worse, Irish Brits, that make it a core component of their personality. Cue Andrew Muller's joke about being twice the Irishman Joe Biden is.
Whatever.
A holiday to Ireland also goes hand in hand with the increasing trend to vacation in cooler climes. The last decade has seen record-breaking temperatures across the globe, and for Europe that is no exception. I'm not quite ready to accept the end of high season in the Mediterranean, but from wildfires in Greece and Spain to the soaring mercury in Italy, maybe it is time to get used to something a little different. I arrived in Kenmare in County Kerry early on a Sunday morning. The cloud was thick and the air was anything but still. Along the wild Atlantic Way from Cork Airport, the houses were coloured with green and yellow and red and white flags, foreshadowing the All-Ireland hurling final that was just 7 days away. Spoiler alert, don't worry rebels, we'll get them next time. And as it turns out, the west of Ireland is really beautiful and a great place to spend a week. My days consisted of munching on freshly baked soda bread in the local cafe, drinking fresh pints of Guinness and listening to trad music in the dimly lit Crowley's bar. Journeys were made down the coast to take fresh dips in the usually wild but oddly calm Atlantic Ocean. Plunging into the cool, still green waters are enough to relax even the most tightly wound soul, but the serenity was somewhat impelled by my sister and I screaming for our lives at the sight of a purple palm-sized compass jellyfish. On a day when the rain was particularly bad and there was no way we were getting in for a swim, we drove further west to Helen's Fish Bar, a restaurant recommended to me by a friend who knows the area. Whilst there are no exacting main roads in this part of the country, when we pulled off onto a single-track and overgrown country lane in the middle of a storm, it was hard not to question whether we'd made the wrong turn. We emerged from the damp canopy of low trees and a rather unassuming pub was revealed to us. As we swung open the front door, we were met with a cacophony of voices, laughter, the smell of fried fish, and thankfully for some of us, the mutterings of golf commentary. The food was simple, fresh crab sandwiches and seafood platters, but to me there's nothing like sampling the local bounty. Days ended with cuddles from next door's sheepdog, we named her Sheba, half-finished games of Scrabble, laughs on the sofa and early nights. Quite honestly, it was the holiday that I needed and I'm really glad it proved me wrong. Restorative breaks come in all shapes and sizes, and it doesn't need to be 35 degrees and clear blue skies to be enjoyable. And although we truly got a taste of the weather that warrants the nickname of the Emerald Isle, the best part about it for me was that my dad really enjoyed being home. For Monocle in Kenmare, I'm Monica Lillis.
And my thanks to Monica Lillis for that. And that's all the time we have for today's edition of the Monocle Daily Live from Zurich. The warmest of thanks to my panellists, Eemeli, Isoaho and Jessica Bridger, who came in today. And thanks too to our producer, Desi Bandley. Our sound engineer here in Zurich was Desi Bandley, and Steph Chungu was back in London. I'm Emma Nelson here at Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich. The Monocle Daily is back at the same time, different place back in London. But for now, goodbye and thank you very much for listening.